So welcome everybody to the Governance Evaluator Experts Insights webinar. Our audience today, we have well over 100 registered today from multiple industries, from health, from aged care, from government departments, education, not-for-profits, community banks, and we've also got consumers as well. And this really reflects the imperative for getting this right across all organisations. So the background to our webinar today, the Governance Evaluator in 2018 did their Governance Capability Benchmark report, and we analysed board responses from over 70 boards across multiple industries, comprising of almost 700 members. Remarkably, the #1 governance risk identified across all of these sectors was actually stakeholder engagement. Boards need help in engaging directors in stakeholder engagement through development of a strategy that clearly identifies who the stakeholders are and the relationships and their needs. So to that end, and as part of our commitment to building effective boards, we're delighted to present today's webinar. So our topic today is effective stakeholder engagement, how to plan, how to implement, and how to assess. Our presenter is Kellie O'Callaghan. And Kellie has had many previous roles. She's been the chair of a regional health service board, an elected councillor and former mayor. She's had a range of state boards and committee appointments. And she's been the chair of Better Care Victoria Consumer Advisory Committee. Kellie currently works with the Australian Medical Council's recognition of medical specialist committees and the Monash School of Medicine. She's a course advisor. It's actually a course advisory board. So as the lead of O'Callaghan and Co, Kellie assists organisations and individuals to harness the great depth of opportunity that exists when you develop trusted, connected and genuinely engaged relationships with stakeholders and networks. I personally have known Kellie for a very long time, and so I'm so excited to be working with Kellie today. Today, Kellie's going to be exploring the most common questions asked by boards about how to plan, deliver and assess effective stakeholder engagement. Kellie's going to give us a wonderful overview, and the overview is going to be around the following 5 questions. Who are our stakeholders and why is it important to engage with them? How do we plan effective stakeholder engagement and involve our directors in the plan? How do we implement effective stakeholder engagement? How do we assess and report on our stakeholder engagement? And what are some top tips for quick wins? And as I said, Kellie is going to give us a really fabulous overview of these answers today. But if anybody wants to talk at a deeper level, of course, we'll have information towards the end of this, how to follow up with Kellie afterwards. So it's with great pleasure that I'm now going to hand over to Kellie.
Fee, thank you very much. It is always an absolute pleasure to spend time with you and to explore all things stakeholder engagement. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to get straight into it and start off with who are our stakeholders and why is it important to engage them. So for those of you working across a range of sectors, you have indicated that stakeholder engagement is an area, particularly in relation to governance practice, where you want to make sure that you have the opportunity to understand who your stakeholders are and why you need to engage with them and how that relates to your core business and to the other activities that you undertake, either on a day-to-day basis or in your planning and some of your forecasting and aspirational thinking around the work that you do. So every day we engage with people, with organisations, with other entities, and even with regulators around the work that we do. And for each of those, they have an interest or a stake in the purpose of our organisations, in the services that we deliver. For some, they'll also be inherently connected to the visions of our organisation. Some have a key focus on quality and what it is that we are delivering and how we deliver that to them. But in any way, each of these stakeholders is connected at some point with our strategic plan. So for most of our organisations, you'll have a strategic plan or a strategic direction. You'll have some ideas around how that plan impacts not only in relation to your stakeholders, but also in relation to the broader work that you undertake. Your stakeholders impact on every element of your organisation. In relation to who they may be, they're potentially your clients, they're people that access your services, they might be volunteers in your organisation, they could be board members, members of other advisory committees, right through to departments, regulatory bodies. There's a range of other representatives that you would engage with. And importantly, for a lot of organisations, your community, that broader community, both immediately proximate to your services, but also that broader network of community that exists pretty much all over the world in relation to your organisation, and whether that be an on-the-ground direct connection through participating on site in services or in activities that you do, but also those people now that are existing out there in social media. So those people who are connecting in other ways with your organisations as well. Each will bring a different perspective to your organisation, and for each of those, their level of interest will fluctuate depending on the type of work that you're seeking to engage them in and what their interests are at the time. So at any point in time, you'll have a combination of stakeholders that you're looking to engage with, and that will vary. Sometimes they'll mix up a bit and they'll sort of cross-pollinate their ideas. But on other occasions, you'll be dealing with a discrete group of stakeholders and looking to get their engagement around that activity. In terms of bringing that strength to your work, they bring a great insight to their perceptions and concerns about your organisation. Stakeholder engagement will give you a really clear indication of anticipating responses of your customers. It's a great frame in terms of considering risk management, communication, and trust that you build with your stakeholders and consumers. It also reduces the tension that can exist between service delivery decisions and rollout of activity. And it also adds a lot of credibility when you can create openness and trust in relationships with your stakeholders by engaging with them directly, and particularly when they expect that there's going to be accountability and transparency around your engagements with them, they'll be more likely to want to spend time with you, problem solving, overcoming issues, and feeling really empowered to be part of the services and the activities that you actually provide. Those who do stakeholder engagement particularly well focus their skill sets and their team's resourcing around two-way communication. From time to time, you'll be wanting to just provide information to your stakeholders, and that's perfectly okay as well. But for the most part, what we're talking about today is how we really engage in that two-way communication, genuine listening, being respectfully responsive, keeping informed of what our stakeholders believe, and also informing them of what we're doing, but also ensuring that our stakeholders are across a level of understanding around how we will actually work with them to utilise their contribution. So what is it we do with their information once we've actually engaged with them? Any level of effective engagement has an understanding of the values, the beliefs, and the perspectives of the stakeholders that we're engaging with. It's not just about agreeing. It's also about understanding there are differences in perspectives. Sometimes that can get a little bit robust, sometimes it's a bit combative, but it's a very authentic space. You need to be very transparent, very open, and accept that some level of disharmony and disagreement will exist. There's also a significant risk in not engaging with your stakeholders. Potential delays around rollout of service and projects. You may have to revert to secondary consultation. You really do risk damaging communities' capacity in terms of their understanding of social licence you may have to operate in some of the work that you do. You also run a very real risk of media, and particularly social media blowback, by not having effective stakeholder engagement, reputational damage, and for many, the great fear that a lot of organisations have, potential litigation, being held up in litigatory processes around work activities or service complaint and concern that weren't effectively engaged to start with. So stakeholder engagement is not only important, it's actually expected and it's essential to all of the work that we do in our communities and services. So now if we move on to how do we plan effective stakeholder engagement and involve our directors in the plan. So I'll run this through as a parallel conversation. One of the most challenging things that often exists in that tension between operational and governance spaces is engaging your board directors in conversation around engagement. When we work through planning a stakeholder engagement, the first thing you need to look at is your purpose. Why do you want to engage? What are your objectives? Have you written down in a very simple but actionable way what that purpose is going to be, what those objectives will look like? If you need to, sit and just ask yourself, why are we doing this? And ask others in your team. Test that with a broader network. Also test it with people who are not immediately connected to the work that you're doing. That will give you a really clear sense of whether your purpose aligns to what it is that you're setting out in your plan in terms of your objectives and the actionables in relation to your stakeholder engagement. At that point, when you're talking about purpose, also engage your board. If this isn't already a delegated task from a board, make sure that you're having conversations so your board understand that you're about to enter into a significant level of engagement. You don't want surprises for your board. Boards don't like that. And they're also going to give you some really good feedback in relation to what their expectations are. They might have some adjustments. They might just have some further considerations for you to enter into your purpose build. The next thing you need to do is identify those stakeholders. So who is it that you're actually going to talk to? Work through a brainstorm, activate your networks, ask your current stakeholders who they think the other stakeholders would be that you should talk to. If you are an organisation or a service that engages in social media and you feel that it's something that you can confidently get involved in, engage in social media. Have some conversations about the work you're planning to do, about conversations you're planning to have, and ask your social media market, who do they think you should talk to? They will come up with ideas. They'll probably tag people in some of the posts. Get actively engaged in having conversations not only about the engagement itself, but the lead up to the engagement and the work you're looking to do. The other thing that's really important is don't avoid those people in your network, in your partnership groups, or in your community who don't like your service or have had significant complaints about your work. They are key people you need to engage. So find a way to do that successfully. Be proactive, get on the front foot, don't hide. The reality of stakeholder engagement is there is nowhere to hide. So get out there, engage with everybody, including those people who are probably going to tell you a whole heap of things that you might not want to hear. Invest a bit of time in learning about your stakeholders and consider what level of participation they're going to have. For those of you who want to do a bit more of a deep dive around participation, the IAP2 website, so the Public Participation Spectrum website, will give you a whole heap of information around levels of engagement around stakeholders and participation. Basically, we're looking at whether you're informing, whether you're consulting with the stakeholders group that you've got once you've identified who they are and what their needs are, whether you're involving them in actual policy building, whether there's a great depth of work you need to do, whether you're collaborating with them, so whether you're actually working in partnership with them around their work, or whether you're empowering them, so building their skills and their capacity to make a final decision that basically will be of mutual benefit, not only to your organisation, but to your group. So head over to that website if you want to have a little bit more of a deep dive around public participation, because it is a really important element of what you need to do. Be really clear around your plans. Design your plan and your engagement objectives to meet yours and your stakeholder needs. Be considerate of the abilities of your stakeholders and make sure that you plan to document all of the work that you do. For a lot of organisations, that will mean having someone in your team document the activities. I would actually suggest in parallel also have a community reporter involved as well. Doesn't mean a media representative, that someone out of that stakeholder group may be nominated by the stakeholder group to work in parallel with your team to keep their own record of the engagement and use that in terms of the engagement process and some of the reporting as well. Remember that stakeholder engagement and the activities and the planning around it is dynamic. Make sure that your planning document is dynamic and is able to flex. Be really clear on timeframes, on roles and responsibilities, on your budget, on the resourcing, not only from a people perspective, but everything about where you're going to hold your engagements and what those obligations are going to be, and also the costs around disseminating information down the track, because you'll need to do that as well. Be realistic about your limitations. Don't overreach. Don't let things get out of hand. Be realistic around what you're able to achieve and have a solid risk plan. You will need to work through processes of feedback and evaluation. We'll talk a bit about that a little bit later. But when you're looking at issues of risk in relation to your planning, if your expectations are very different to your stakeholders, you're going to have some difficulty. You don't take into account the history that's existed for your stakeholders in relation to either the project you're doing or the services that you're engaging with them about, you're going to run a risk as well. So the respectful thing is be considerate of the history, know who those stakeholders are. Don't cut yourself short. Make sure you've got enough time in terms of that engagement, and consider that some people in your network may actually be over-consulted. Make sure that you take an equitable approach to those people you talk to so that there's some balance in the consultation, and make sure that none of your stakeholders are excluded. Be thorough in your planning. Have all of your teams across your plan, because that is terribly important. Everybody needs to be comfortable and confident, and engage with your board about that engagement at every possible intersection of those plans. It might be having a board sponsor sit in some of your engagement work and then they report back to your board. Your board is going to see the impact of this work anyway. So keeping them across, even just with a brief update, information that they can have, or a board sponsor in that space, can be very, very helpful. So now we need to move through to how do we implement effective stakeholder engagement? This is where the rubber hits the road. This is the stuff that we need to talk about in relation to the resourcing for the work you're going to do. It needs to be relevant. All of your stakeholder engagement needs to be relevant. There is no point taking a cookie cutter approach to stakeholder engagement, applying it to your organisation, to your stakeholders, whether it's your residents in an aged care facility, whether it is your customers in relation to a water board, whether it is any type of industry-based organisation. If it is not relevant and it doesn't suit your organisation and your stakeholders, it's just not going to stick. It really does need to be accessible. So give those considerations a lot of thought when you're planning and resourcing and looking at the effectiveness of your stakeholder engagement. Authentic leadership and genuine intent is going to get you a very long way in relation to stakeholder engagement. Stakeholders are very connected to the reasons why you do what you do, not just the work you actually do for them. It's often a bit of a misconception. It's not all about what you do for me. It's also about understanding the human elements and knowing why it is that you do what you do. So be authentic, be genuine, be honest, be open and transparent. If you get out of your depth, say so. Have that conversation with the stakeholders, readjust what it is that you're considering and talking about, or get some help in if you need. If your stakeholders understand why you're doing what you're doing, you will be more credible to them. They will also be more engaged in the work you want to undertake. For those organisations that are working with large numbers of stakeholders who have a significant level of diversity around their mix, I also suggest that in a group of stakeholders where you have that diversity, in a significant way, consider bringing in trusted voices to the conversations. These will be people who exist probably within stakeholder consultations already, not necessarily with your organisation, but maybe with others. They're people who are genuinely committed to seeing development and improvement and opportunity across a range of areas, but they may have an interest in the engagement that you're undertaking. It may be that you as the organisation may introduce the conversation and have one of the trusted voices come along and speak to their experience of your service. They also might be involved in the direct stakeholder engagement themselves, and they are a great buffer and they can provide you with some wonderful feedback. Your community already has a connection to these trusted people, so engage them in the process of assisting you with your engagement, and that will get you a long way. If you're looking for some really good examples around fabulous approaches to stakeholder engagement that have a real cause and an opportunity, look at something like Gippsland Jersey. Sally Jones and the team are very clear and engaged around their purpose, their accountability, they're very authentic, they've got a huge level of buy-in, and they cross a range of sectors in relation to the work they do. Industry, farmer wellbeing, they're also looking at mental health and a range of other relevant issues. Some organisations, particularly in the health sector, when you're looking at new standards being introduced, a range of services now go and print the standards onto T-shirts, wear them around their organisations as conversation starters, engaging with staff, engaging with their consumers, but having some really good conversations about the work they're doing and then gathering up those narratives and information as well. So there's some really good examples. When you're entering into these effective engagement considerations, look at the time, make sure that you're well prepared, that you've planned, that you've got the skills that you need, and that you can actually engage based on the resources you've got. You can take a team-based approach, so you might skill everybody up and have everybody engaged in it, so there might be a large number of people involved in your engagement, or you might have a key team member take the lead in relation to your engagement and then work around more of a project model where they're a little more directive and a little more able to support the broader team network. Document every element of your process. So the processes, your plans, your feedbacks and evaluations, it is essential for your review. It's essential if you want to review, replicate and replace. When I talk about review, replicate and replace, there are a few things that I think are really important. You need to review everything that you do. You need to be able to replicate it if you want to do it again. And the hit by a bus theory, you need to be able to replace in the event that someone's too sick to come to work or gets another job or goes and does something else, you need to be able to replace the people that are engaged in that element as well. So document everything and then you review, you replicate and replace will be covered as well. Have some contingencies ready, resources, people, expertise, and be prepared for some secondary engagement. From time to time, you need to loop back. You've got to go back and consider some things that you maybe didn't pick up on the first swoop. There might have been some really complex conversations in the room that you needed to park. You might want to go back and delve into those in a little bit more detail and do some individual interviews and grab some narratives around that. Be prepared to do that. Put it in your plan. You might not use it, but it's good to have it available. I won't talk too much about engagement techniques themselves. Most of you will be across that and there's plenty of resources available. But we're talking about everything from public meetings, workshops, afternoon teas, observations, surveys, social media, even your websites and your submission programs. So there's lots of opportunities there. If after going through all of that process and planning and working out what's going to be effective for you, it still feels like it's out of your reach, you don't think the confidence is there either for you or for your team, consider engaging some practical assistance. I think it's really important for organisations to understand this needs to be sustainable. You need to have skills, techniques and problem solving. This work should be embedded into all of your activities where you have an element of engagement with a stakeholder. At any point where there's an intersection, in a meeting, in a service, in any capacity of delivery, engagement or planning. It is best that you have that skill embedded within your organisation. If you need to get someone in to help you to build those skills, then that might be something you need to do. Plan around how you're going to do that, but it really isn't sustainable in the long run to just keep buying bits all of the time and then having big gaps in your stakeholder engagement. Implementing effective stakeholder engagement is about building trust. It's about creating pathways, access, and engaging authentically and consistently. It's also about making sure that you do what you promise you're going to do. So if you're not going to be able to do that, then you really do need to reach out and get some help so you're in a really strong position when you deliver on your stakeholder engagement. Assessments and reports. These are the things that people tend to find a little challenging in relation to stakeholder engagement. It really doesn't need to be that hard. So how do we assess and report on our stakeholder engagement? This is the element of engagement where people do find that there's that real challenge between formal data collection and narratives and the detail of what we're trying to explain in terms of our community or our stakeholder story. Be really clear about the measurables that you're going to utilise in terms of your assessments and reporting, and make sure that they're openly discussed all of the way through. Discuss them in relation to the plan, discuss them with your stakeholders as you move through, and of course you'll discuss them in the end when you look at feedback and reporting. Be really clear on each element that you're evaluating so that there is a very clear understanding of how they connect up, but also what it is that you're looking at. So when you're talking to your stakeholders, when you're talking to your board, there's a really clear understanding of what it is that we're trying to evaluate. You want to understand the success of the activities that you're undertaking in terms of your engagement, but you also want to understand the success of the overall process. So there's a few things we can look at in relation to that. Some of that process-related work and outcome, your board will be more interested in. The activities themselves will probably inform your personal practice, because that's the stuff you want to know. Did it work? Did the stakeholders enjoy it? Did I find that it was something that was beneficial? And did we all get to a point where we thought it was of value and we'll all want to use it again? The other important thing to consider in relation to all of this is feedback. So after you engage in activities, you want to provide meaningful feedback to your stakeholders. Stakeholders along your process have provided you with a range of contributions. What they want to understand is how that contribution is going to make a difference. If you've already got pre-existing feedback loops within your organisations for your stakeholders, use those. If you don't, develop a feedback plan. So be very clear about what that will look like for you and how that feedback will get back to those stakeholders that you are engaging with, and also back to your board. Have some conversations with your exec around how that's going to feed in conversations around strategy, around risk, around future resourcing, and around priorities around your services. The reports themselves, when you have these feedback conversations, whether they're conversations, written reports, whatever they happen to be, must, and this is a must, contain the issues raised by the stakeholders. Don't pretty it up too much, don't edit it back too much. You really do need to give that authentic voice to your stakeholder. You need to make sure that that's considered in the fullness of the feedback. People will look for it, so make sure that you put it in there. How to report back. Report back mechanisms are a really great way to engage with your board. It will give you timeframes to work to. It will give your board expectations to be able to set through your exec team. So create some goals for yourself, some goals for your team, and let your board have some expectations around reporting back around your work. Provide participants with everything from written feedback, feedback forums if that's more appropriate to your audience. For some of the groups you're working with, digital comms is going to be the best way to get information back to them, particularly for stakeholders that are time poor. They might just want a bit of an update where we're at, how the engagement's going, where some of that feedback is looking to be moving towards. Ensure your feedback and your reporting is timely, that it's a method that's been tested and agreed with your stakeholders. Nothing worse than when people go into stakeholder engagement, then get a report or feedback document back and go, okay, well, I'm not really sure that's what we agreed was going to happen in terms of the feedback, or something's missing. Take every opportunity during and after your stakeholder engagement to provide feedback and report. It's a really important element of validation for your stakeholder engaged participants. They actually want to be continually involved with you. And if you're validating them by providing them with that continuous loop of feedback and report, they will be very happy. The other thing is stakeholders, like all of us, want to be taken seriously. So there's a level of trust there. So consider the diverse ways that you're going to need to provide your feedback and to report in an inclusive way. I won't go into a lot of detail about the reports, but they need to include everything from your processes, your engagement activities, your feedback outcomes, and how the stakeholder contributions were considered. I guess a key tip coming out of all of that is stakeholders will look for themselves in your reports. They will look for their commentary, they will look for the elements that look like them, they will look to their peer groups reporting within this work as well. That's about them seeking validation in terms of the process and their role and what that looks like, but it's also about them effectively credentialing your process, making sure that you're picking up on the issues that were important to them. So respect that when people open this up, sometimes they're actually looking for themselves in it. And I don't mean a picture of themselves, they're looking for content that reflects back to them, their perspectives and the information they shared with you as part of the stakeholder engagement. Evaluation is more around some questions that you can be asking yourself. So, was the engagement plan effective in achieving our objections? What were the lessons that we learned? Was there a strong accountability frame for our stakeholders? So did they feel they could hold us accountable? What will inform our improvements? What's going to underpin some of the work that we want to do into the future? And this is why evaluation is really important for us. You will want to improve your stakeholder engagement, but you will also want to develop, for those organisations who don't have them already, a stakeholder engagement policy, or a mechanism by which you can replicate some of these principles down the track. Again, another great point where you can intersect with your board, because your board's then likely to look at the development of these policies and what that means for them. So there's a great engagement opportunity for your board there as well. Lots of conversations and questions that can be asked around evaluation, and there's great long lists of them. So we can point you in those directions as well. But look for things like, what did we learn? What did we miss? What were the challenges? What will we change? And were our stakeholders satisfied with the process? You can always revert back and drill down into more information with stakeholders if you need to. So successful stakeholder engagement strategies really do have the integrity to stand up to the rigours of a process of stakeholder engagement. They also have the capacity to flex and adapt around specific activities, to allow new things in, to allow new ways of thinking and designing and innovating around engagement. They are full and inclusive considerations of diverse gatherings. They also have a full and frank perspective. You don't need to clean these up to the point where it all looks shiny and lovely. They will have elements in them that will tell your broader stakeholder group, who may not have participated, but will look at your report back and evaluation, what the problems were and what it was that you're looking to overcome in terms of challenges. The measures themselves will also be clearly articulated. Now we're going to move on to quick run, top 5, not top 5, won't do top 5, I'll do more than 5. Top tips for quick wins. So we'll run through some of those things that you can consider in relation to stakeholder engagement. So this is top tips for quick wins. Engage early. Embed your engagement in your core business. Make it part of everything you do. Every interaction you have with someone who is engaging with your service, no matter what type of service that is. Stakeholder engagement principles can be applied across a range of services and organisations. Engage early and embed really solid stakeholder engagement practice into your core business considerations and right across your teams. Don't try and bolt it on. There will be a lot of organisations who will have had an experience, and many of you may have had it yourself. You've entered into something with the best of intention and decided partway through a project, well, you need to just hack a bit of stakeholder engagement onto the back end of this. Doesn't work. Stakeholders will immediately call you out on the basis that you didn't design or co-design, which I could eat and sleep if I had the opportunity to, those key elements of designing the planning of the engagement in relation to the work or the project or the service that you're doing. So take that opportunity to be very robustly tested around your thinking of where stakeholder engagement fits. It practically fits everywhere. Be authentic, don't overreach. So when we're talking about authenticity, it doesn't need to be highly polished. It doesn't need to be perfect. But you also need to know the limitations of your expertise. You need to know the limitations of managing a crowd. That doesn't mean you don't do it, but it might mean for the first few times that you do it, you have someone come in to give you some assistance, to co-facilitate with your team, to build up some of those skills, to get confidence up so that they can see what it looks like when things can get a little bit tricky in a room and have got the capacity to engage in a little more of a successful way. They can also give you some really good feedback around how to maybe change up your approach that sits a little more comfortably with your team, and where those intersections are going to be around your authenticity, what you do well, and while you're building that confidence, what are the things that you might stay a little bit away from till you get to the point where you're comfortable. You might be engaging with small groups. You might not go to a really large town hall meeting until you've got the skills to be able to manage 200 people in a crowd. Pick elements of stakeholder engagement that will work for you. They need to work for you. They need to work for your stakeholders. They need to be practical. Just because someone else is doing something and it looks shiny and new, and often happens a little bit with technology, where there is a drive towards wanting to use technology and engagement, that's great. But if it's not what you do and it's not what you're good at and you're not comfortable, just consider how you're going to do that and plan that really, really well. You don't want to get caught out. Build capacity to sustain ongoing engagement. This is really important. You need to know that once you start engaging, it's going to keep rolling. So once you've established those relationships and built that rapport, your stakeholders are going to want to continue to engage with you. So as you get more skilled at it and more confident, it's more likely to happen. That's then going to flow to your organisation. If you're great at engaging, people are going to expect that other people in your team also will start to develop these skills, and it's the culture of your organisation to engage with your stakeholders. So make sure you've got a bit of a sustainable approach to stakeholder engagement within your organisation. If you genuinely don't have those skills, or they're just as a bit of a build that you need to do, reach out and get some support. You don't need to feel overwhelmed by the process. It is a skill, it is something you can learn, and it is a body of work that you can develop within teams and organisations. And it's something that everybody can have an element in, and it's an important thing to consider. A strong, confident and engaged team will actually get a whole heap of benefit out of engagement now and into the future. Make sure that your engagements are nimble and they are a little bit focused on being intuitive and responsive. If you skill up your team, if your engagements and your team are nimble and responsive, whether an engagement is planned, something that you've actually sat down and worked through, or whether it's an incidental one, you're going to be prepared to be able to do it. Engage your board in stakeholder engagement at as many possible intersections as you can. Connect your board's thinking around strategy, risk, compliance, and resourcing to engagement with stakeholders. You have those conversations in the frame of stakeholder engagement. For those board directors who, despite their best efforts, don't necessarily connect up with an understanding of value of stakeholder engagement, it'll make it a little bit easier. So don't assume that people understand the benefit of stakeholder engagement in relation to boards and governance, connected to strategy, risk, compliance, and resourcing. Lead with trust. Be a trusted person, be reliable, be credible in the room, and use those trusted voices if you need to. If you're going into a room full of people and they don't know you and you don't know them particularly well, find some connecting points. If that means that you initially meet with people in advance of those sessions to get some of their perspectives and get a little bit of a background beforehand, do that, and then help those trusted voices to help you engage in some of those conversations. Keep the lines of communication with your stakeholders open at all times. Make sure that they feel that they can come and freely talk to you. Make sure they can provide additional information as they need to. The reality of stakeholder engagement, if your stakeholders are not talking to you, they're talking to somebody else. So you might as well be very, very clear on the pathways where people can share information and engage directly with you. If people want to engage, encourage them to find a pathway to be able to do that and plan it as part of your engagement strategy. Remember that stakeholder engagement is highly energizing for teams. So it's also a great way to do some team building activities, to get people working together, to bring out emerging leaders within your teams as well, to give them an engagement project to work on, to buddy them up with someone, and to also do some skills development for them too, either individually or as part of a bigger team. So consider that highly energizing. They're great skills to learn. And look, it's great fun. Meeting with people, talking to people about what you love, which is your core business and the things you're passionate about, is great. So create some opportunities for those emerging leaders within your team as well to develop their skills around stakeholder engagement. The benefits of stakeholder engagement are far-reaching. They will by no means diminish in any way. Stakeholder engagement is accelerating at a rapid rate, and you will see much more of an expectation around engaging with stakeholders on a range of levels across your organisations. And there are ways that you can engage directly with your stakeholders and bring great success, not only to the individual engagements, to your organisations, but also to those who participate, because stakeholder engagement also brings a level of value to those who are able to contribute to your organisation. So don't forget that either. Above all else, enjoy the engagement. Your stakeholders will spot it in a heartbeat if you don't. So be the person who loves the engagement, be the organisation that embraces the opportunity. They'll spot it. They will absolutely spot it. It's been great talking to you. And now I get to hand back to Fee for the wrap up. Thanks, Fee.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much for bringing such compelling and practical insights to us today. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you. We've all been sitting here absolutely glued. So where to from here? There are several ways in which you can expand your knowledge on the topic of stakeholder engagement. So Kelly has really kindly put together a fact sheet featuring quick tips for stakeholder engagement that will be emailed to you, all the attendees today, along with our special thank you, which will be the link to this recording, which will be absolutely fabulous. The recording will be really useful for those of you who don't or haven't been doing key stakeholder engagement yet, or it will add to the processes of those of you who started it already. We'll also be loading the webinar onto our YouTube channel and onto the Governance Evaluator Resources Library as a series of 5 short conversation starters for you to use at your boardroom table and your boardroom meetings. For those of you in the health sector, we're really lucky because if you join us at our Governance Evaluator Breakfast at the VHA and ACHG 2019 Governance Conference in Melbourne on Friday the 3rd of May, Kelly's actually going to be our presenter at our breakfast, and she's going to talk to us about bringing the voice of the consumer to the boardroom table. So if you'd like to discuss with Kelly how she can help your organisation, please follow up with Kelly, contact Kellie O'Callaghan and Co on LinkedIn or on the email that you can see on this slide. and I know she'll be incredibly helpful to you to either enhance the process you're already doing or to get you going with your process. And if you'd like to be part of our 2019 Governance Capability Benchmarking Report, please don't hesitate to discuss how you can use or become part of our Governance Evaluator solutions. Just please contact us on the email here on the slides, and we would just be delighted to talk to you and introduce you to our really straightforward but intelligent solution for building your governance skills and helping you to have strong governance. So thank you very much for joining us today, and until next time, stay tuned and keep engaging.